It was supposed to be just another ordinary Saturday. Edith had already prepared the chicken the night before. The linen tablecloth had been carefully ironed on the table. The candles were ready in the silver candlesticks she used for family dinners. At 77, that still gave meaning to her days. She liked to take care of the details, not because she had to, but because she believed that was how she showed love. The kitchen was small, but alive with memories. The stained apron she didn't mind. Wearing the old clock that made a little noise every second. The picture frames with pictures of Toby and Rebecca when they were still children, with gouache paint on their hands and laughter on their faces. All of that formed the backdrop for the small joys she allowed herself. But that Saturday, a text message interrupted the sauce preparation. It came from Garrett, her oldest son, the same one she had moved worlds for when she was widowed, the one she had helped get back on her feet after college, even paying for the down payment on the house where he lives today. The message was short. Cold. Mom, you don't have to come over today. Marisa would prefer dinner to be just the four of us. I hope you understand. For a moment, Edith thought she had read it wrong. She cleaned her glasses, reread it, her chest tightened. It wasn't the first time she had felt left out, but she always found an excuse to not let herself believe it. But now it was there, written down. No room for doubt. She was no longer welcome, and maybe she never really had been. She stood there, with the ladle still in her hand, staring at the screen of her cell phone as if she were waiting for the words to change on their own. The smell of roasting chicken began to fill the kitchen, but it no longer whetted her appetite. Edith placed the cell phone on the counter and rested her hands on the sink, trying not to let the tears fall. A part of her wanted to respond calmly, pretend she understood, say it was okay like she always did. But another part, quieter, older, felt something breaking inside, a different kind of tiredness, not physical, but of the soul. That sentence Marisa prefers it to be just the four of us, hammered in her head like a reminder that she had been excluded from her own family, and not by chance, by choice. Even so, she didn't cry. She turned off the oven, washed the dishes that hadn't even been used, took the tablecloth off the table, and put everything back in the cupboard. The ritual of reverse tidying was automatic, almost honest. The candlestick went back on the high shelf. The candles went in the sideboard drawer. The plates went in the top cupboard. As she did this, Edith found herself remembering the little scenes from the past few years that she had always chosen to ignore. The look of impatience from her daughter-in-law when she talked too much. The way Garrett seemed more distant with each meeting. The constant lack of response to the affectionate messages she sent in the family group. And, most of all, the feeling of always walking on eggshells. If any gesture of hers could be interpreted as intrusion. But what hurt the most was realizing that perhaps everything she had offered had been accepted out of convenience, not affection. That night, Edith was unable to eat dinner. It wasn't just sadness, it was a confusing mix of humiliation, rejection, and shame. She felt ashamed of having deceived herself for so long, of having built the image of a united family when, deep down, she had always been a piece that was only kept as long as it was useful. She went upstairs slowly, feeling her joints weigh more than usual. She sat on the edge of the bed and remained there, motionless, with her hands resting on her legs. She looked around. The room still had the burgundy rug that she and her husband had chosen together, the nightstand with the books he read before bed, and the photo of the two of them in Venice, smiling. Eve, you worry defended me, she thought. For the first time in years, Edith felt a pit in her stomach that didn't come from her husband's absence, but from the presence of his contempt. The next day, she woke up early as usual, but for the first time, she didn't feel like making tea. She walked through the living room in silence, stopped in front of the picture frame of her grandchildren, and took a deep breath. Rebecca was 23 years old and always sent affectionate messages, albeit sporadically. Toby, on the other hand, didn't even reply on his birthday. Edith knew she couldn't demand affection from anyone, but it still hurt her. After sitting in the window seat and looking at the garden for several minutes, she made a decision. She got up, grabbed a pen, the blue notebook where she wrote down her commitments, and started writing a list. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Automatic payments linked to the account." Below, item by item, she listed Garrett's condominium, Rebecca's school, the family's health plan, Marissa's car payment. It was more than 20 lines long. Edith didn't cry as she wrote. Each line of the list seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders. She had never done that before. She always authorized everything over the phone, trusting that her son would know how to handle it. She had even given him registered power of attorney to make it easier when she got older. Now she realized how vulnerable this had put her in, without even realizing it. When she finished the list, she stared at the paper for a while. Her cell phone was next to her, but she didn't want to call, didn't they want to talk. She just wanted to start getting out of that position of eternal provider of emotional and financial service. She got up, grabbed her purse, and went to the bank. When she got there, she sat down with the manager who had known her for years and calmly asked that all payments be stopped immediately. The manager, polite but surprised, asked if she was sure. "I am," Edith said, her voice firm and They canceled the debts, blocked the power of attorney, and she even asked to redo the will. She left with everything in order and a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't relief yet, it was a new emptiness, as if she had just stepped out of a role she had worn for decades. On T Street, she sat on a bench in the square next to the agency, took her sunglasses out of her bag, and stood there, staring at the movement. For the first time in a long time, no one knew where she was, and no one cared to know. But instead of hurting, that sounded like a respectful silence, a space that, who knows, she could occupy in another way. If you like, I can continue now from paragraph 11. Do you want me to continue? It was supposed to be just another ordinary Saturday. Edith had already prepared the chicken the night before. The linen tablecloth had been carefully ironed on the table. The candles were ready in the silver candlestick she used for family dinners. At 77, that still gave meaning to her days. She liked to take care of the details not because she had to, but because she believed that was how she showed love. The kitchen was small, but alive with memories. The stained apron she didn't mind wearing, the old clock that made a little noise every second, the picture frames with pictures of Toby and Rebecca when they were still children, with gouache paint on their hands and laughter on their faces. All of that formed the backdrop for the small joys she allowed herself. But that Saturday, a text message interrupted the sauce preparation. It came from Garrett, her oldest son, the same one she had moved worlds for when she was widowed, the one she had helped get back on her feet after college, even paying for the down payment on the house where he lives today. The message was short, cold. "Mom, you don't have to come over today. Marissa would prefer dinner to be just the four of us. I hope you understand." For a moment, Edith thought she had read it wrong. She cleaned her glasses, reread it. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the first time she had felt left out, but she always found an excuse to not let herself believe it. But now it was there, written down, no room for doubt. She was no longer welcome, and maybe she never really had been. She stood there, with the ladle still in her hand, staring at the screen of her cell phone as if she were waiting for the words to change on their own. The smell of roasting chicken began to fill the kitchen, but it no longer whetted her appetite. Edith placed the cell phone on the counter and rested her hands on the sink, trying not to let the tears fall. A part of her wanted to respond calmly, pretend she understood, say it was okay like she always did. But another part, quieter, older, felt something breaking inside, a different kind of tiredness, not physical, but of the soul. That's and then, Marissa prefers it to be just the four of us, hammered in it. Head like a reminder that she had been excluded from her own family, and not by chance, by choice. Even so, she didn't cry. She turned off the oven, washed the dishes that hadn't even been used, took the tablecloth off the table, and put everything back in the cupboard. The ritual of reversed hiding was automatic, almost anesthetic. The candlestick went back on the high shelf. The candles went in the sideboard drawer. The plates went in the top cupboard. As she did this, Edith found herself remembering the little scenes from the past few years that she had always chosen to ignore. The look of impatience from her daughter-in-law when she talked too much. The way Garrett seemed more distant with each meeting. The constant lack of response to the affectionate messages she sent in the family group. And, most of all, the feeling of always walking on eggshells as if any gesture of hers could be interpreted as intrusion. But what hurt the most was realizing that perhaps everything she had offered had been accepted out of convenience, not affection. That night, Edith was unable to eat dinner. It wasn't just sadness, it was a confusing mix of humiliation, rejection, and shame. She felt ashamed of having deceived herself for so long, of having built the image of a united family when, deep down, she had always been a piece that was only kept as long as it was useful. She went upstairs slowly, feeling her joints way more than usual. She sat on the edge of the bed and remained there, motionless, with her hands resting on her legs. She looked around. The room still had the burgundy rug that she and her husband had chosen together, the nightstand with the books he read before bed, and the photo of the two of them in Venice, smiling. If you were here, you would have defended me, she thought. For the first time in years, Edith felt a pit in her stomach that didn't come from her husband's absence, but from the presence of his contempt. The next day, she woke up early, as usual. But for the first time, she didn't feel like making tea. She walked through the living room in silence, stopped in front of the picture frame of her grandchildren, and took a deep breath. Rebecca was 23 years old and always sent affectionate messages, albeit sporadically. Toby, on the other hand, didn't even reply on his birthday. Edith knew she couldn't demand affection from anyone, but it still hurt her. After sitting in the window seat and looking at the garden for several minutes, she made a decision. She got up, grabbed a pen, the blue notebook where she wrote down her commitments, and started writing a list. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Automatic payments linked to the account below." Item by item, she listed Garrett's condominium, Rebecca's school, the family's health plan, Marissa's car payment. It was more than 20 lines long. Edith didn't cry as she wrote. Each line of the list seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders. She had never done that before. Say always. Authorized everything over the phone, trusting that her son would know how to handle it. She had even given him registered power of attorney to make it easier when she got older. Now she realized how vulnerable this had put her in, without even realizing it. When she finished the list, she stared at the paper for a while. Her cell phone was next to her, but she didn't want to call DDAN 212 Talk. She just wanted to start getting out of that position of eternal provider of emotional and financial service. She got up, grabbed her purse, and went to the bank. When she got there, she sat down with the manager who had known her for years and calmly asked that all payments be stopped immediately. The manager, polite but surprised, asked if she was sure. "I am," Edith said, her voice firm and They canceled the debts, blocked the power of attorney, and she even asked to redo the will. She left with everything in order and a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't relief yet. It was a new emptiness, as if she had just stepped out of a role she had worn for decades. On Test Street, she sat on a bench in the square next to the agency, took her sunglasses out of her bag and stood there, staring at the movement. For the first time in a long time, no one knew where she was, and no one cared to know. But instead of hurting, that sounded like a respectful silence, a space that, who knows, she could occupy in another way. On her way home, Edith walked slowly through the streets she had known for decades. The neighborhood was the same one where she had raised Garrett, where she had taken her grandchildren to the park when they were little. But now everything seemed different. Not because of the trees, the houses, or the smell of bread coming from the bakery on the corner, but because of the inside. For the first time, she felt that this city could truly be hers, and not just a backdrop to serve others. She passed by a flower shop and bought a bunch of yellow tulips, not because it was a special day, but because she felt like it. When she got home, she placed the flowers in the center of the table where she would have served dinner and stood there, looking at them as if testing out a new beginning. It was at that moment, in front of the freshly placed flowers, that something inside her broke completely. But it was a different kind of breaking than before, not of pain, but of recognition. Edith realized, with almost cruel clarity, that she had never allowed herself to be a priority for a single day. Not on birthdays, not at Christmas, not during mourning. She had always been the one organizing everything, paying for everything, taking care of everyone. It had been that way since she got married at 23. And now, at 77, she felt the accumulated weight of more than 5 decades of living to make sure others were okay, even if it made her invisible. In that moment, she didn't cry. She just took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and began deleting contacts from her address book, one by one, starting with Garrett. In the days that followed, Edith became more silent than usual. Not out of sadness, but out of a kind of introspection she had never experienced before. She no longer felt the need to text to ask how her grandchildren were doing or if they needed anything. She also no longer called to see if her son had managed to fix his car problems or if her daughter-in-law needed help with the groceries. It was as if a part of her, that had previously been on constant alert to serve, had finally gone to sleep. And oddly enough, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like rest. She began making small changes to the house. She removed some of the photos from the bookshelf, not all of them, just the ones that now seemed more like an obligation than a genuine affection. She gave away objects she had only kept out of attachment to others. Old toys she had saved for when the grandchildren came, dishes that Marissa had liked, books that Garrett had left to pick up later but never picked up. Little by little, the house stopped being a family sanctuary and started to feel more like her own space. For the first time, she began to realize how much she fit into the corners of the house, and not just the roles she played in it. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers in the hallway drawer, she found an old travel folder. It was from Tuscany. She and her best friend Eleanor had talked about it once when they were still taking Italian classes for women at a local cultural center. At the time, Edith had said she couldn't travel because the boys needed me, and Eleanor had responded with her usual dry humor. "You sound like you're a full-time nurse." Edith had laughed at the time. Now, when she reread the folder, she didn't laugh. She just picked up the landline and called her friend. "Are you still up for going to Tuscany?" she asked. On the other end, there was laughter. "Of course I am. Primera, gese." Starting to think you'd never wake up. They spent the next few weeks organizing everything. Passport, travel, insurance, reservations. Edith didn't tell anyone in her family, not out of revenge but because, for the first time, she wanted to do something just for herself, without anyone's validation. Rebecca was the only one who knew, because she showed up one day to visit her with a carrot cake out of the blue. Her granddaughter walked in with her usual sincere smile and said, "I came without warning. I wanted to see you." Edith felt her heart warm. They talked for hours, like old friends. When Rebecca heard about the trip, her eyes lit up. "You deserve this so much, Grandma. So much. It's been a long time." The day of the trip arrived. Edith calmly packed her bags, organizing everything with lists and labels, as she always did. But now, without tension. She put a note on the bedroom mirror before leaving. "You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are human." At the airport, she found Eleanor wearing a huge hat and a map folded in her arm. The two laughed like teenagers. During the flight, Edith looked out the window and felt something loosen inside her chest. It was not sadness. It was something else, a mixture of longing for what she never experienced and gratitude for still being alive to try. In Tuscany, she rediscovered the pleasure of unhurried food, of aimless walks, of long conversations about everything and nothing. She visited villages that looked like paintings, tasted wines without knowing their names, let the sun touch her face without thinking about time. It was as if every step away from England was also a step away from the obligation to be useful all the time. It wasn't about running away from her family, it was about coming home to herself. One morning in Siena, Edith was moved to tears when she saw a lady playing the accordion in the square. The melody was soft, but it touched her in an unexpected way. She remembered when she was young and dreamed of learning music, but never had time. Because soon after she got married, became a mother, and became a widow at an early age. She stood there with tears in her eyes and a full heart. She thought, there's still time. On the way back to the hotel, she wrote down on a piece of paper, buy a small keyboard, take online lessons, and put it in her pocket. Little by little, she began to rebuild a new idea of who she was. No longer the selfless mother, the grandmother who paid for everything, the woman who held the family together with paid bills and planned dinners. She was now a woman who learned to walk alone in foreign cities, who said no without guilt, who savored strong coffee on the balcony without thinking about what she should do next. And this new space she created for herself was not a cry of revolt. It was a space of silence, of choice, of dignity. It was only after all this that Garrett tried to reach out. First, a curt message. Why did you stop the payments? Then, a missed call. Then an unexpected visit to which Edith didn't answer the door. He left a crumpled note in the mailbox. Are you really going to leave us high and dry? And that's when Edith realized, for him, it was still about what she provided, not who she was. Her answer was simple. None. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-love is silence. When she returned from her trip, Edith felt different, even in the way she walked. It was as if her steps had more presence, more firmness. The house seemed lighter. Things were in the same place, but she wasn't. She went straight to the kitchen, made herself a strong tea, and for the first time in years, drank it alone without rushing, not as if she were waiting for someone to arrive, but as if she was there entirely. She left her suitcase in the hallway, her clothes unpacked. She sat in the window seat and let time pass. No plans, no pressure, no one depending on her at that moment. In the following days, Say gradually got back to her routine, but with a new filter. She discarded everything that was Zente Reali. She canceled a newspaper subscription she had because her grandson liked it, changed her cell phone provider for a simpler one, sold her car, which spent more time parked than in use. Even her closet went through a sorting process. She donated clothes she had bought because they were good for family birthdays, and kept only what she liked to wear. It wasn't a sudden change. It was clarity. Now she only wanted to surround herself with what represented her, what made her feel good, even if it was little, even if it was simple. Rebecca kept showing up, sometimes with cheese bread from the bakery, other times with some news from her internship. The two of them created an unorganized routine. Her granddaughter never asked too many questions, but she was also always there. Edith felt that this was the most authentic relationship she had. No interest, no games, no formality. One day, Rebecca brought a hardcover notebook and said, "Grandma, you should write all this down. No one can imagine what you've been through, and the way you're living now. It's beautiful to see." Edith laughed and changed the subject. But that night, she opened the notebook and wrote the first sentence. It was supposed to be just another normal Saturday. With Ashline, she relived everything, the pain of the message, the silence in the house, the cancellation of payments, the trip, the rebirth. Not as a way of venting, but as a testimony, as a record of something that many women her age never dared to do, choose themselves. She wrote for weeks, without rushing, without worrying about grammar or style. It was raw, direct, real, and in the middle of the process, she realized how much she had kept quiet, not only about that situation with her son, but about a whole life of silences, of stifled desires, of postponed choices. Garrett insisted again. He tried calling Toby from his cell phone, then sent an email. He said he didn't understand why he was so cold, that she was being manipulated, and that the family was suffering. Edith read everything calmly. No response. Not because she was angry, but because, for the first time, she didn't need to explain herself. She knew what she was doing, and she also knew that this wasn't revenge. It was the end. It was breaking up. It was the only way to keep from sinking again. One day, Toby knocked on the door. Alone, he had a confused look, a bit arrogant, but also a hint of shame. He said he wanted to understand better what was going on. Edith invited him in and offered him tea. The conversation was strange, a mix of attempts at rapprochement and veiled justifications. He said that no one imagined she felt that way and that everyone thought she liked to help. She calmly replied, "I did. Until I realized I was the only one contributing something in this relationship." Toby was silent for a few seconds. Then he said that maybe they had exaggerated. Edith just smiled, as if she knew she was no longer responsible for raising an adult. That visit did not turn into a reconciliation, but it did not turn into a fight either. It was simply a faithful portrait of what remained, a cold relationship of inevitable distance. Toby never came back, nor did he send a message afterward. Edith was not surprised, nor was she frustrated. She did not expect more. What she needed to say, she said. What she needed to hear, she heard. En delera. Above all, what she needed to end, she ended. As the months went by, Edith began to find a new rhythm. She started taking online keyboard lessons as she had promised herself. She signed up for a reading group at the city library. She began walking twice a week with Eleanor, who was now a regular presence in her mornings. Sometimes they would go out for coffee. Sometimes they would just sit on a bench in the square watching people go by. Life, now, was not full of commitments, but it was light. And, above all, it was hers. One afternoon, she received a handwritten letter from Rebecca. It said, "Grandma, I just wanted you to know that I admire everything you're doing. If I ever come close to being half the woman you are, I'll consider myself strong. Thank you for showing me that we can reinvent ourselves, even after 70. Edith read it with tears in her eyes. She put the letter in her little box of important things next to the photo of Venice, the note with the mirror, and the folder. From Tuscany, because now she knew what really matters fits in small spaces and fills the heart entirely. At the end of that year, Edith decided that Christmas would be different. For the first time, she didn't buy presents for the whole family. She didn't order a basket. She didn't plan a meal. She didn't call to ask who was coming or if they needed anything. She did one thing. She booked a dinner for herself and Eleanor at a small, dimly lit restaurant with home-cooked food. They spent the evening talking about everything, toasting with white wine and laughing over old stories. There was no exchange of gifts, whose presents, and that was enough. It was the quietest, but also the most real Christmas she had ever experienced. As the new year began, Edith felt time with a different weight, no longer as a countdown, but as an open field. Little by little, her health even seemed to improve. She slept more peacefully, no longer woke up with a heavy heart, nor with that old anxiety of being needed. Her body seemed to respond better to the light days. The tests came back normal. Even the doctor commented, "You're fine. Has anything changed?" Edith smiled. "I've changed the way I live." Finally, she began to write more. She turned that notebook into a running diary, where she recorded small, everyday gestures that had previously gone unnoticed, like the taste of freshly brewed chamomile tea, The sound of birds in the early morning. The sound of the keys on the electric keyboard when she missed a note and laughed to herself. It wasn't just about recording memories, it was about realizing herself living something she had done for others for decades, but never for herself. One day, Eleanor suggested that they start a blog together. We write and publish. If you want to read it, don't read it. Edith thought the idea was funny at first, but then she agreed. Rebecca helped her set it up. Nam Medit restarts after 70, and they started posting short stories. Their travels, lessons learned, and rants. They didn't expect much repercussion, but within a few months, they started receiving messages from other women. They said things like, "I thought it was too late for me, but after reading you, I decided to take a course." Or, "You gave me the courage to cut my ungrateful son out of my life." These messages affected Edith more than she would admit, because for the first time, what she was offering the world was not money, practical help, or was inspiration, exchange, present, with no expectation of anything in return. No hidden agenda. It was a new kind of contribution, and one that was far more valuable. She had never felt so seen. And paradoxically, this only happened after she stopped offering herself as an eternal source of solutions. One day, Garrett sent her a letter. Not an electronic letter, a handwritten note. He said he missed her, that things were difficult, that the house was hanging by a thread, and that he recognized that he might have overstepped his bounds. He asked, in a more subtle way, for help, and he implied that he expected a response. Edith read the entire letter calmly. She felt a pang. Yes, it wasn't hate. It was sadness. But after thinking about it for a few days, she decided not to respond. The letter was placed in a folder, along with other documents. Like a page read from a book she no longer wanted to continue. It was hard, harder than she cared to admit. There were nights when she wondered if she was being too harsh, if it wasn't her job as a mother to be there even if she was hurt. But deep down, she knew that this idea of a mother who can handle anything was what had trapped her in this prison for so long. And if she didn't break it now, she might never be able to. The pain of the breakup was real, but for the first time, it was accompanied by peace. And then came her birthday. Her 78th birthday, Rebecca had planned a simple afternoon in Edith's garden. Just the two of them. Eleanor and a neighbor she had met on walks. There was lemon cake, iced tea, and heartfelt laughter. There were no expensive gifts, no elaborate arrangements, but there was affection. Edith looked around and thought, maybe this is it. This is what being alive is all about. It was small in quantity, but huge in quality. And at that moment, she knew she wouldn't trade it for any Christmas, with a full table and an empty heart. That night, before going to sleep, she wrote in her diary, 78 years old and I'm finally learning what it means to be free. It's not about breaking away from others. It's about breaking away from the idea that I only have value if I'm serving. Today, I served myself, tea, cake, and dignity. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and laid down with a slight smile on her lips. For the first time in a long time, she slept with a light body and a whole soul. The next day, Edith woke up before sunrise, not because she had an appointment, but because her body seemed eager to live the new day. She got up slowly, felt the cold floor under her feet, and went to the kitchen. She calmly made coffee, heated up a piece of cake from the day before, and sat at the table, facing the window. The sky was beginning to lighten, and she, with a cup in her hands, felt something she hadn't felt in the mornings for a long time. Enthusiasm, a genuine desire to be there, present, alive, ready, as if she were 30 years old again, but with the lightness of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. As the days went by, Edith began to recognize small changes in herself that, when added together, made all the difference. She no longer apologized for wanting to be alone. She no longer justified herself when she said no. She learned to go for walks without telling anyone. She began to explore neighboring neighborhoods where she had never been due to lack of time or because she always had someone more important to take care of. One day, she went into a small bookstore and spent hours there, leafing through Italian cookbooks, thinking about buying one of modern poetry, something she had never read. She left with 3 volumes in her bag and a feeling of achievement. One morning, while organizing her bedroom drawers, she found an old letter from her husband. It was from when he was away on business, and it spoke of longing, trust, and love. Edith read it calmly, savoring each line as if tasting a rare wine. When she finished, her eyes filled with tears, but without pain, only gratitude. She realized that even though she had lost her partner early, she had held the family together for decades. But now she understood. The true love she had received did not require endless sacrifices. He loved her for who she was, not for what she did for others. The letter inspired her to write something that had been developing for months. A text about finitude and freedom. She published it on her blog under the title "When They No Longer Owe Us Anything, and That's Okay." The text went viral. It received hundreds of comments, including from young people. People said that they saw in her words the courage they wished they had. Edith read each response with a mixture of humility and surprise. She never thought her story would resonate so much. But there she was, a 78-year-old woman, inspiring people in their 20s. 30 segundos, 40 segundos, and not because she had done something extraordinary, but because she had done what seemed impossible to many. Breaking away from the role that suffocated her and starting over. One day, she received an invitation to participate in a discussion group at a local community center. The topic was New Cycles After 60. Rebecca encouraged her to accept. Edith hesitated, but went. She arrived shy, with sweaty hands, but was received with affection. When she began to tell her story, she saw attentive looks, discreet tears, and knowing smiles. At the end, a 65-year-old woman held her hand and said, "You said what I always wanted to say. Only now I think I still can." Edith went home with a full heart. For the first time, she felt that what she had experienced, even the painful ones, was not in vain. After that event, she began to be invited to other conversations, small groups, and even local radio interviews. Nothing glamorous, but it was beautiful to see how her experience created bridges. She never wanted fame or exposure, but knowing that her pain, transformed into a choice, could pave the way for other women gave her meaning. What had once been a void was now a mission. Not to save anyone, but to show that it is possible to save yourself, even when no one expects you to try. Garrett remained silent, and so did she. Sometimes it hurt, especially when she saw families gathered at the grocery store or parents with children in restaurants. The loss didn't go away, but now it was no longer she accepted the longing without letting it guide her steps. She had learned that some relationships die even if they were blood ties, and maintaining self-respect often meant not insisting. Letting go is also a form of love for oneself. First and foremost, Toby even sent a polite email a few months later. He said he was finishing college, that he remembered the carrot cakes from his childhood, and that he hoped she was doing well. He was respectful. He didn't ask for anything. He just wrote. Edith responded with a short but affectionate paragraph. "I'm glad you're remembering the good things. Take care of your life with responsibility and affection." "I'm fine." That was enough. Neither of them tried to prolong it. And, oddly enough, this small gesture was a worthy conclusion to a relationship that, for a long time, had been sustained only by silence. Edith's friendships expanded. In addition to Eleanor, she met younger women at the book club, women who had also gone through painful new beginnings, and even a widower named Arthur, with whom she began to talk regularly. He was 81 years old, with a strong Irish accent and a warm laugh. There was no romance, at least not at that moment. But there was something new, uncomplicated company. They walked together in the park and exchanged stories of their youth, talked about music, laughed at silly things. It was light. It was good. And Edith realized how much that was enough. On one of these walks, Arthur said, "You know, Edith, there are people who live their entire lives without discovering who they really are. You discovered it when you were 77. I think that's damn lucky." She laughed, looked up at the sky and replied, "Or maybe it's the right time. If it had come sooner, maybe I wouldn't be ready." And that's what she came to understand. Everything in its own time. Even the courage to be who you always were, but never could. Edith's new routine included simple things that had previously gone unnoticed. Taking care of the plants on the balcony, rearranging the books on the shelf, listening to Italian music while preparing lunch. These were not big events, but each moment felt full. Sometimes she found herself smiling to herself as she remembered something funny she had heard from Eleanor, or the first notes she had managed to play correctly on the keyboard. Time, which had previously seemed like a dragging weight, now wove itself calmly. And she was finally the author of her own Desno, longer and extra in the lives of others. One morning, Edith received a package in the mail. It was an envelope with her name handwritten on it, with no return address. When she opened it, she found a book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, with a dedication written on loose paper. It said, "I hope this reading finds you at the right time. Thank you for being a beacon." She was moved. She didn't know who had sent it, maybe a reader of the blog, maybe someone in the conversation circle, but it reaffirmed something she was still learning to accept. Her story, told truthfully, had become useful in a new way, not through sacrifice, but through inspiration. As the months passed, Edith began to feel more at home. She began to look at herself in the mirror more slowly, to try out hairstyles, to put on lipstick even when she was not leaving the house. It wasn't vanity, it was presence. She took care of her own body with the same delicacy with which she took care of her grandchildren when they were small. As if to say, "You matter, too." She began to write down recipes she wanted to try, to plan small dinners for herself. Sometimes she would invite Eleanor. Other times, she would just light a candle, put on soft music and eat slowly, savoring her own effort. One Saturday afternoon, Rebecca showed up with a gift wrapped in craft paper. She said, "It's not a special day, but I saw this and thought of you." Edith opened it and found a frame with a phrase embroidered on it. "Your love taught me freedom." The two hugged right there, at the door of the house. They didn't say much, but they both knew that this moment was important. Edith had been many things to her granddaughter, but, above all, she was now a mirror. And that was worth more than any inheritance, any check, any position as a perfect grandmother. One day, while reviewing old papers, Edith came across the will she had rewritten months earlier. She read each clause carefully and felt that some things needed to be updated. She called her lawyer and scheduled a new appointment. She included donations to charities she supported, named Rebecca as the person responsible for some decisions, and completely removed anyone she no longer had an emotional connection with. Not out of spite, but out of coherence. "What remains should represent who I was and what I believe," she told her lawyer, who nodded respectfully. On her way back from the office, she passed a thrift store she liked. She went in, without rushing, and found a navy blue dress made of light fabric. She tried it on right there, in the tiny changing room, and liked what she saw. She bought it. When she got home, she hung the dress on her closet door, as if to tell herself, there's still life to live. Then, she wrote another section on her blog, entitled, Small Rituals of Freedom. She talked about how certain pieces of clothing hold the energy of a new cycle. She received dozens of comments from women who had also bought something just for themselves for the first time in years. Edith began to be invited to participate in community projects. A public library invited her to lead a writing workshop for women over 60. She hesitated at first. She didn't think she had the right profile. But Rebecca encouraged her. "Grandma, you've experienced things that many people don't even have the courage to talk about. That's enough." And she accepted. The workshops started small, with 5 or 6 women. Over time, they grew. The stories shared there were heavy, beautiful, real, and Edith learned as much as she taught. There, she was no longer the invisible lady in a silent house. She was a bridge. At one of these workshops, she met Luke, a 66-year-old former nurse who had been forced to retire after caring for her mother for a decade. The two quickly bonded. Lutea said she felt like her life had stopped. Edith listened to her for weeks, without judging. One day, she gave her a copy of the notebook where she had written her story. Lucia cried when she read it. She said she had never known there could be strength in that kind of pain. And then she started writing too. Those exchanges were healing, not only for the listener, but also for the speaker. It was as if, by sharing the pain, they both became a little more whole. Time passed, and even with all the progress, Edith knew that some scars would not disappear. There were still days when she missed someone. There were still mornings when she woke up with a strange emptiness in her chest. But now she knew what to do with it. Instead of trying to fill the hole with chores, phone calls, or donations, she embraced it. She made herself a cup of tea, put on some music, and told herself, "You have survived things no one else has seen. Now live the life that only you can live." And that was enough. Over time, Edith realized that starting over was not a milestone, but a process, and that even after so many firm decisions, small tests still arose. Like the day she ran into Marisa at the market by chance, the two stared at each other for a second that seemed like an eternity. Marisa forced an uncomfortable smile, said a barely audible hello, and continued with the cart. Edith just nodded, without saying anything back. She felt her heart race, her breathing heavy a little. But, contrary to what she expected, there were no tremors, no tears, just the confirmation that there was nothing left to be rescued. As she left the market, she sat on the bench in the square in front of her, with a bottle of water in her hand and her eyes closed for a few minutes. She took a deep breath. That small interaction, so insignificant on the outside, was one of the last internal ghosts she had faced. She realized that, for a long time, her pain had been more linked to expectations than to reality. She expected recognition, gratitude, reciprocity. But now, she no longer expected it, and not because she had given up, but because she had understood that expecting this from someone who cannot see is like watering a stone while expecting a flower. That same night, as she reread one of Rebecca's old letters, she found herself smiling. Her granddaughter, even without knowing it, had been a kind of anchor in this whole process. The only family presence that didn't demand anything, didn't judge, didn't disappear. She was just there. And in that constant presence, Edith rediscovered a part of herself that she had thought was lost. She thought about writing something to her, but then decided to just invite her to dinner. She made a simple pasta with fresh tomatoes and freshly grated cheese. When Rebecca arrived, the smell of food filled the house. They sat at the table like two women, not like grandmother and granddaughter. And that was new too, and beautiful. It was during that conversation that Rebecca told her she was thinking about moving to another city. She had gotten a spot on a master's program abroad. She was excited, but also scared. "I'm afraid of leaving you alone, Grandma." Edith took her hand firmly. "You don't leave me alone. Darling, you taught me how to keep myself company." They both cried softly, but without sadness. It was a kind of separation that didn't hurt, it just showed that the most valuable relationships are those that free, not those that bind. The farewell was marked by a light lunch, laughter, and a long hug at the boarding gate. Rebecca left, promising to keep in touch. And she did. Postcards, funny audios, photos of European cafes with notes like "This one is just like you." Edith kept everything in a wooden box that she labeled "Real Presences" because now she knew the difference. Not everyone who is close sees us, and not everyone who is far away forgets us. In the following months, Edith returned to the keyboard more often. She could already play short, complete songs, even if she made mistakes here and there. She hummed to herself, laughed at her own mistakes, and sometimes even recorded short videos and sent them to Eleanor or Arthur. Art, which had been distant before, was now a form of expression, of permanence. She began to compose short passages, phrases that she transformed into melodies, loose ideas about growing old without fading away. One day she said to Lucia, "We don't disappear with age. We just change our tone." And, to her surprise, that phrase became the title of an exhibition of photos of elderly women promoted by the library. At the opening of the exhibition, Edith was invited to say a few words. She walked up onto the small stage with firm steps, her eyes attentive to the audience, which was made up of young people, women, couples, and students. She said only what she felt, that her life changed the day she stopped trying to deserve the love of others, and she began to offer herself the love she had always hoped to receive. They gave her a standing ovation, not for her rehearsed speech, wasn't even but for her courage to be sincere without bitterness, for the unarmed truth that she carried in her eyes and hands. After that day, Edith returned home with her heart racing, not from anxiety but from a quiet joy. She put on her navy blue dress, lit 2 candles on the sideboard, and made herself a glass of wine. She sat on the porch with a light blanket and a book on her lap. She read a few pages, then simply stared at the darkening sky, and she whispered, without anyone hearing, "Thank you for not letting me give up on myself." It was a thank you to life, to herself, and perhaps, who knows, to her husband who somehow, she felt would be proud. One night, as Edith was writing in her journal, she found herself remembering her childhood home. Her mother sewing in the dim light, the smell of bread in the late afternoon, her grandfather sitting in his rocking chair. The memory came to her suddenly, as if pulled by some invisible thread, and there, alone in the silence of her own room, she realized something she had never said out loud. The woman she had become was, in part, the sum total of all the women who had come before and, also, the one she had chosen to be after. It wasn't just about breaking the cycle of unconditional giving. It was also about honoring those who had never been able to do that. And now, she was doing it. In the following weeks, she decided to start a new project with the women in the writing group to put together a collective book with real stories of new beginnings after 60. Nothing overly edited, nothing romanticized, just truths. Painful, beautiful, human. They called the project It's Never Latte. They received texts from women who had left abusive relationships, who had broken up with controlling children, who had come out as lesbians at 70s, who had learned to drive at 68. Such different stories, but united by silent courage. Edith felt, at each meeting, that the book was like a mirror. Each woman reflected a piece of her, and she reflected a piece of them. The book was launched in a small but cozy library. The event was intimate and full of emotion. Some women cried as they read. Exceps allowed others could only smile and be thankful. Edith, at the end, read an unpublished text. It spoke about the difference between living and enduring. She said, "For many years, I thought I was living, but I was only enduring, and enduring is tiring. Life truly begins when we stop trying to please those who will never actually see us." She was applauded, not with shouts or euphoria, but with the kind of deep silence that only appears when everyone is feeling the same thing. From 10 on, Edith began to receive invitations to speak in other places. Small community centers, universities open to senior citizens, reading clubs. She always refused invitations that were too commercial. She said that her story was not a product. It was a seed, and a seed needs fertile soil, not shop windows. She continued with her simple routine: tea, reading, typing, walking, blogging, meeting with Eleanor and Arthur. Now also with Luke, and with new women who arrived, like someone who finds a lighthouse after walking in the dark for a long time. Garrett never came back to look for her, and that, over time, stopped being a wound. It became just an absence that no longer hurt. Edith understood that, for some people, love is only recognized when it stops being given. And even then, it is not always enough. There was no more resentment, just an empty space, which she chose not to fill by force. Because now she knew not every space needs to be filled, and not every relationship needs to continue. What is a true bond remains. The rest, we let go. One cold morning, Arthur showed up with a gift. A vinyl copy of a jazz record she'd mentioned in an old conversation. "I found it at a flea market in London and thought of you," sighed shyly. Edith smiled and invited him to lunch. Their relationship was still light, unhurried, but there was a growing affection. She still didn't call it love, perhaps to avoid labeling it too much, but she knew it was a good presence. A kind of peace that only exists between two people who don't want to fix each other, who's to be. Over time, Arthur's visits became part of everyday life. He would show up with fresh bread, old newspapers, flowers from the market. Sometimes, just to listen to Edith play the keyboard, he would sit in silence, drinking tea. When she missed a note, he would laugh, but without irony. He would laugh as if to say, "It's okay to make mistakes. I'm here anyway," and she would understand, and she would appreciate it. It was beautiful, it was new, and, above all, it was deserved. He once suggested that they take a trip together. Nothing big, just a weekend on the coast. You choose the place. Edith hesitated. Traveling with a man, after so many years as a widow, seemed bold. But then she thought, bold for whom? And she accepted. She chose a quiet little seaside town with small inns and good food. They went by train, laughing like teenagers. The first night they had dinner by candlelight. And she thought silently, it's never too late. It never was. When she got back, she felt that a new door had opened inside her. A door that didn't have to do with romance. Exactly. But with trust, with the right to be cared for, too. Arthur never tried to invade anything. He was just there, whole. And that was rare. With him, Edith didn't need to explain herself, or reduce herself, or justify herself. And that, for her, was love. Not the kind you see in soap operas, not the kind you see in youth, but the kind of mature love that knows that presence is worth more than promises. A few weeks after the trip, as she was organizing her notes for the upcoming writing workshop, Edith realized that she had stopped recording the days of pain. Her notebook was now filled with ideas, inspirational quotes, descriptions of peaceful moments. It was as if the narrative of her life had changed tone from survival to choice. It didn't mean that everything was easy or happy all the time, but she now felt in control. And this emotional autonomy, which had taken so long to achieve, was her most precious possession. She shared this perception in the conversation circle that week. She said, in a firm voice, "I realize that what hurts the most is not always what others do to us. It's the time it takes us to understand that we no longer need to accept it." She saw some women nod with tears in their eyes. And at that moment, more than ever, she was sure that she was in the right place. Not because she was admired, but because she was now part of something where she could be whole without playing any role. One Sunday morning, she got a call from an unknown number. It was Toby. He said he wanted to talk, that he was living alone now and had a lot on his mind. Edith took a deep breath and said he could stop by for tea. When he arrived, he was different. More reserved, less arrogant. He brought a bag of cookies and said he had made them. They talked calmly. He didn't ask for anything. He just told her about his life, asked about hers, and listened. And for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was still room for some kind of reconnection if it was done with respect and truth. After that visit, Toby texted her every now and then. He asked about books, sent her songs. He never invaded, never forced anything. And Edith cautiously let the relationship rebuild itself, but now within clear boundaries. There was no more room for manipulation or disguise the lack of affection. She knew what she deserved. And if someone wanted to be in her life, they would have to come whole, and not just to use her. For the first time, she felt like she was teaching her family something, not with words, but with attitude. Arthur followed everything with the patience of someone who understood that certain pains cannot be erased with new affection. They simply coexist. The two had created a beautiful routine. They visited small cafes, exchanged books, and did crossword puzzles together. Sometimes they just sat in silence, side by side. When asked if they were a couple, he always replied, "We are whatever you want to call us. But above all, we are good for each other." Edith laughed and said, "And that is already much more than most people have." Over time, she also began to allow herself to rest more. She slept in when she felt the need and took afternoon naps without feeling guilty. She no longer did everything in a rush. When someone called and she didn't want to answer, she simply didn't answer. If something was inconvenient, she said so firmly. She stopped apologizing for existing, and this freedom, which to many seemed trivial, was a daily relief to her. Each small choice for herself was a new brick in the structure that she rebuilt calmly and courageously. In the spring, Edith decided to plant herbs on the balcony. Rosemary, basil, mint. She tended to them every morning, as if renewing silent pacts with life. She would say, jokingly, that the plants grew faster because the house breathed differently now. And it was true. The energy was different. Less pressure, more presence. Less fear, more curiosity. Sometimes Arthur would bring new pots, and she would get excited with ideas for recipes, teas, and mixtures. It was a new way of sharing time. During a book club meeting, a young student asked, "Ms. Edith, what would you say to someone who is afraid of moving on after they get older?" Se to u que se to for a moment and replied, "I would say that fear comes with you. It doesn't go away, but it doesn't have to be the driver. We can put it in the back seat and keep going." The class laughed and applauded. She laughed too, but deep down, she knew that sentence had come from many days when she herself had driven with fear sitting by her side and still gotten where she needed to go. On a cloudy afternoon, sitting on the porch, Edith looked at the flowers growing in the pots and thought about how much she had been reborn in the last few months. Sometimes she seemed like a different person. Back deep down, she knew she was the same as always, only now without the weight of accumulated silences. She picked up her notebook, opened it to a new page, and wrote, "When we choose ourselves, the world changes color. Not because it has changed, but because our eyes have finally rested from waiting." She closed the notebook calmly, and she felt she was ready for whatever was to come. With arrival of summer, Edith began to leave the house more. She participated in neighborhood fairs, cultural events, and even short trips with her reading group. All of this was like, it wasn't a need to fill time, but to live it with intention. One Saturday, while walking through a nearby village, she came across a stand selling old postcards. She bought 3, one for Rebecca, one for Eleanor, and one last one for herself. Yes, she wrote a card for herself. "You survived, and now you flourish, love, Edith." She posted it without hesitation. Rebecca responded a few days later with an enthusiastic phone call. She said she was doing well in her master's degree, that she had met incredible people, and that she brought her grandmother into conversations. "Whenever someone talks about strength, I always talk about you." Edith was moved. Sometimes she worried that distance would create silence. But with Rebecca, there was never that threat. They were connected by something deeper, a mutual admiration, a constant gentleness, a shared freedom. Arthur, for his part, spent more and more time with Edith. He didn't invade, he didn't demand, he just added to her. One day, he showed up with a picnic basket. He said he wanted to take her to a park he used to go to with his late wife. "I think she'd like to see you there," he said. Edith agreed. They went together, spread out their blankets on the grass, ate simple pies, and laughed to the sound of children playing around them. She looked at him and thought, "I didn't have to reinvent myself to be loved. I just had to allow myself to be seen." In the following months, they began to think about a longer trip. Arthur suggested Ireland. Edith was excited. It would be the first time she had traveled with a companion in decades, not out of family obligation, not to visit relatives, but out of pure desire. They planned everything together: accommodation, light itineraries, days without plans. Rebecca helped with reservations. Eleanor, with advice on what to pack. When they set off, Edith was calm. There was no fear. There was curiosity, and that, for her, was a sign of youth still alive. Ireland enchanted her. The green fields, the locals' accents, the cafes hidden in the villages. On a rainy afternoon, she and Arthur took shelter in a small bookstore for almost 2 hours. They talked about old books, untold stories, losses, and new beginnings. He held her hand gently, and she didn't let go. In that gesture, she felt not a request for possession, but a promise of presence. And she realized that, yes, she was in love, with the serenity of someone who has already experienced a lot, but also with the sweetness of someone who still allows herself to be touched. Back in England, Edith resumed her routine with the same care, but something had changed. Now, she no longer felt any urgency. She no longer felt the rush to resolve anything, nor the burden of supporting anyone. The relationships that remained were real, firm and light at the same time. The silence that had previously hurt was now comfortable, and the loneliness that had frightened her so much had given way to a solitude full of meaning. She finally understood that being alone was not absence, it was space. One afternoon, she went to the doctor for routine checkups. Everything was normal. The doctor said, "You're fine, Mrs. Edith. That's rare at this age." And she replied, "It's just that I can breathe now. Before, I could only run." The doctor smiled, not knowing exactly what to say, but she knew how much that sentence carried, because that was exactly what it was. For decades, she had lived to keep everything going, to not disappoint, to support structures that didn't always include her. Now, she was just living. On the way back from that appointment, she passed a group of ladies in the square. One of them waved. It was Lucia, with 2 other students from the workshop. They invited Edith to sit down. They stayed there, talking about books, films, plans for future workshops. Someone suggested a monthly meeting with tea and readings. They all agreed, and that was how the free afternoon club came about. A small but affectionate group, and Edith became, once again, a point of connection. But now, without having to give up, without carrying anyone on her shoulders. The blog remained active, with fewer texts, but with more depth. Each post was thoughtful and lived, and the readers continued to appear. Not en masse, but steadily. Women of all ages, some men, young people with grandparents, recently divorced seniors. Everyone saw Edith not as a heroine, but as a companion on the road, someone who had also fallen, who had also been afraid, who had also had to cut painful ties, and who, even so, kept going. That was what made her special. Not perfection, but the simple courage to keep going. One Sunday afternoon, Rebecca video called from Spain. She wanted to show off a new cafe she had discovered. She pointed the camera at the counter, at the details of the decor, and said, "This is just like you." Edith smiled and replied, "Maybe we'll come together someday." And they both knew in that moment that this wasn't just a casual statement. It was a real possibility, because now everything they said to each other came from a place of honesty, truth, and that, Edith knew, was more than she had ever imagined she could achieve after all. Time passed slowly. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler. Edith began to notice the leaves falling from the trees outside her window, and she felt a certain melancholy pleasure in it. Autumn had always had a bittersweet taste for her, but this year, it came differently. For the first time, she didn't associate the season with loneliness or the end of things. It was more like a time of harvest, a time when everything she had planted inside and outside herself began to bear fruit. Rebecca sent an email saying that she planned to spend a few days with her during the holidays. Edith was happy, but calm. She no longer lived in the expectation of being visited, and perhaps because of that, each of these gestures was now received more lightly. She prepared the room with love, prepared new recipes for them to try together, and bought a new placemat for the table. Not out of obligation, but because she wanted to share her new home with someone who respected her. It was a pleasure to think about small details when they came from affection and not from the need to be accepted. During the visit, the two walked a lot, laughed at silly things, talked about the past, present, and future plans. Rebecca mentioned that she might not return to England anytime soon. She had received an offer to extend her master's degree and start an internship in another country. Edith listened attentively, held her hand and said, "Go and live. I'm fine." You taught me that. It was a moment of silence, of contained tears and mutual peace. The two knew they were connected, even when far apart. True love is like that. It doesn't require constant presence, only constant truth. When she said goodbye, Rebecca left an envelope with a note. "Thank you for being brave, Grandma, even when you had to break everything inside to do it." Edith read it after she had left, sitting on the sofa in the living room with a cup of tea cooling beside her. She sat there for a while, looking at her granddaughter's handwriting, feeling her chest warm. This was more than recognition. It was testimony. It was confirmation that everything she had done, even the hardest decisions, had been worth it. A few days later, Arthur came up with an idea to spend the weekend in a country house lent by a friend. Edith agreed. They went together, taking books, groceries, and a few clothes. They spent Saturday lying in hammocks, reading in silence. On Sunday, he made breakfast and brought it to bed. She laughed, surprised, and asked, "Since when do you do this?" And he answered, "Since I realized you never had anyone do it for you." She didn't answer. She just held his hand, and she understood, once again, that the care she had always offered the world was finally returning in a simple but genuine way. That summer trip at night, sitting in front of the fireplace, he said, "You know that if you want, I can stay." Edith looked at him. There was no request. There was no pressure whose presence. She took a deep breath, smiled, and said, "I don't need you to stay, but I want you to keep coming back." And that was it. It wasn't about forming a new marriage or about sealing anything with labels. It was about knowing that you can count on someone without having to lose yourself in the other and there, without plans, they made the kind of agreement that only those who have been through a lot can make. As the end of the year approached, Edith began writing a new text for her blog. The title was "The Versions of Me That Never Come Back." In the text, she spoke of the layers she had shed, the fantasies she had to abandon, the cycles she had ended. She told how difficult it was, and at times cruel, to look at herself honestly and cut ties with those she loved. but she also spoke of the liberation of allowing herself to be, even if it bothers her, even if it displeases her, even if it pushes her away. She posted it without expecting much. But the text went viral. People of all ages began sharing it, and she received messages from parts of the world she had never imagined reaching. Lutea called soon after and said, "You need to turn this into a book." Edith laughed, hesitated, but then thought, why not? With the help of a small publisher in the city, she organized the blog's texts, rewrote some passages, and added stories she had never published. She named the book after a phrase she had written in her diary years before, "Now I serve myself." The cover was simple, an empty rocking chair in front of an open window. It was symbolic, because now she felt she no longer needed an audience, only a presence her own. Mainly, the launch was discreet. At the local library, with tea, cakes, and folding chairs. Many people showed up. Women with teary eyes, young people with grandmothers by their side, blog readers who had traveled just to see her. Edith read a passage in a calm but firm voice. At the end, everyone applauded, and she, there in the center of the room, felt the ground firm beneath her feet in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She was 79 years old, and, for the first time, she felt that this number did not represent the end, but rather breath, a new time, a whole time. After the book launch, Edith walked home slowly through the neighborhood streets. It was dark, but she was in no hurry. Her body felt tired, but not the kind of tired that weighs her down. It was the good kind of tiredness that comes from someone who has lived enough that day. When she went inside, she took off her shoes, turned on a soft light, and put the teapot on the stove. She grabbed a mug, sat on the porch, and looked up at the sky. She smiled to herself. She no longer needed to prove anything. The silence was no longer the absence of voices, it was the presence of herself. The following week, she received a letter from a woman from the interior of Brazil. She said that after reading her book, she had found the courage to leave a 4-year Maria. "You taught me that dignity has no expiration date." Edith read it with tears. In her eyes, she put the letter away with the others. Now she had a box just for this, for the echoes of what she had experienced. She knew that not everyone changes. She knew that not everyone wants to. But just by existing as a possibility, she felt that it made a difference. Arthur started sleeping there from time to time. Nothing fixed, nothing arranged. When he came, they would cook dinner together, read in silence, and sleep side by side, hands intertwined. When he didn't come, she slept. Peacefully, too. There was no longer the feeling that she needed someone to feel complete. It was nice to have company, but even nicer was knowing that her peace didn't depend on it. Loneliness was now just silence, not absence. One spring afternoon, Edith sat with Eleanor on the park bench where she had cried so many times, years before. They watched the children playing, the leaves swaying slowly in the wind. Eleanor, with her usual irony, said, "I never thought we would grow old like this, with our souls alive." Edith laughed. "Neither did I. I thought I would die apologizing for existing." They were both silent after that, and it was the kind of silence that welcomes, that validates, that says everything without needing anything else. Shortly after, during a conversation, Edith was asked what the greatest lesson she had learned from that life cycle was. She thought for a few seconds and replied, "I learned that we can give of ourselves without erasing ourselves." And that, Eve, no. One chooses us. We can still choose ourselves. That changes everything. The answer was written down, published, and shared many times. But for her, it was just the truth, not a catchphrase. At 80 years old, Edith didn't expect much from the world, but she also didn't fear anything anymore. She knew that some wounds would remain, that some voids would never be filled, but that didn't stop her from planting new things. From laughing heartily, from saying no without guilt, from loving calmly. Woman who had once been left aside at a Saturday dinner was now read on other continents. But most importantly, she was read by herself with pride. She still maintained the same simple habits: tea in the afternoon, a journal in the evening, and typing in the morning. When someone asked her the secret to her vitality, she would say, "I stopped carrying other people's things. Now I only carry what fits me." And that, for her, was already a revolution. The pains of the past had not disappeared, but now they took up less space, and the joys of the present knew how to arrive more lightly. They didn't have to be big. It was enough that they were hers. At some point, Edith learned that Garrett was sick. She was told by an acquaintance she didn't look for him, didn't call. Not out of coldness, but because she understood that forced reconciliation is an internal betrayal. She wished him peace in silence, and she moved on. She still felt sadness when she remembered him, but now it was a sadness without self-abandonment. Like a faded photograph, it still exists, but it no longer commands anything. Edith didn't deny her story. She was just no longer a prisoner of it. On her 81st birthday, she received calls from friends, messages from readers, a letter from Rebecca, and flowers from Arthur. She spent the day wearing a light dress, listening to jazz and eating lemon cake. Before going to bed, she wrote in her diary, "I have been a daughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a compulsive giver. Today, I am Edith. And that is enough." She closed the notebook with the calm of someone who is closing a chapter, not out of obligation, but because she knows that what comes next only makes sense when the previous one is closed with truth.